When I moved to that neighborhood, I wanted the exact opposite of what I'd had all my professional life. Silence, anonymity, and no involvement. After more than 10 years immersed in courts, operations, hearings, and rooms full of people trying to tie knots in truth with the appearance of justice, all I wanted was to sit in my backyard with a cold beer, listen to the sound of the birds, and not have anyone at my gate trying to sell me internal regulations with aesthetic advantages. But, of course, peace is a rare luxury where vanity rules. The HOA, the famous Residents Association, was the true parallel government of the neighborhood. It had its own rules, mysterious fees, and a leadership that took power more seriously than many counselors out there. And at the center of it was a woman. She presented herself as the maximum representative of community order, always with a clipboard under her arm, mirrored glasses on top of her head, and the trained smile of someone who believes she's making the world a better place by demanding that all garbage cans be the same color. I, of course, refused to sign any paper binding me to the HOA. Legally, my house was outside the association. The lot had been bought before the group was officially formed, and there was no mandatory clause binding me to that joke of a union in disguise. And I made that clear from the start. She didn't like that, and the standard attack began. First came the polite little notes in the mailbox. We suggest painting your facade according to the palette approved at the meeting. Then the insistent invitations to monthly meetings. It would be an honor to have you join us to discuss visual improvements. I ignored them all. In all honesty, the only thing they improved was the self-esteem of the person leading the circus. The problem with authoritarian people is that they don't know how to deal with those who won't bend. And with me, she ran into a wall. Literally, a high wall, with cameras, an unadorned sidewalk, neutral paint, and an old car parked in the garage. Ah, the car. It was an older model, yes. No vintage relic, just a discreet black sedan, without any aesthetic charm, but with a value that most people don't understand. It didn't attract attention. Perfect for my kind of life. After all, being a federal prosecutor often requires more discretion than authority. But for her, it was a visual offense. She started posting in neighborhood groups. She posted photos of the car with captions like, "Signs of abandonment create a risk to the environment." She sent subliminal messages like, "Conscientious residents keep their vehicles up to standard." Until one day, when she got tired of hints that didn't turn into orders, she exploded in the group. If you refuse to contribute to the HOA, you can't benefit from the neighborhood, or the vacancy, or silence, or respect. No HOA, no rights. The messages were saved, but the worst was yet to come. On an ordinary Wednesday night, around 2 in the morning, I woke up to a dry pop. Within seconds, the house alarm went off. I ran to the window and saw nothing but the scene. The car engulfed in flames, fire coming out of the hood, black smoke rising as if hell had decided to visit the neighborhood. The fire was consuming everything while the neighbors rushed out, frightened, some filming, others trying to help with buckets and hoses. The fire department was quick. They arrived in less than 10 minutes. They put out the flames. But the car? Total loss. At least, that's what the woman thought. She arrived later, with her false expression of shock, and let out a comment that I clearly heard. What a shame. Maybe now he'll understand the importance of participating in the community. With that sentence, she didn't provoke me. She summoned me. The next day, I didn't go to the neighborhood police station. I went straight to the regional unit of the public prosecutor's office. I took the security camera footage. I took the prints of the groups. I took the notes, the records, and, above all, the expert report from the fire department, which showed signs of chemical accelerant in the bodywork. In other words, arson. I put together the whole dossier. Cold, technical, precise. The woman wanted to teach me a lesson. She wanted to prove that without an HOA, no one had a chance. But she didn't know who the neighbor was, who wouldn't bend. A federal prosecutor. with all the tools to turn vanity into a sentence. And the lesson was just beginning. She was still smiling, even after the fire, even with my face splashed across the local papers as a victim of a criminal act in the upscale neighborhood. She still walked around in the morning with the same gait as always, as if she were in an invisible parade where only she won a trophy. She didn't even disguise it. On the contrary, she took advantage of the attention to turn the episode into new motivational material for her bubble of adulators. In the HOA group, her comments bordered on the surreal. Incidents like this only reinforce the importance of keeping a neighborhood united under the same values, as if the fire that consumed my car was a symbol of what she most defended. The standard, obedience, aesthetics, subordination to the entity she treated as her personal creation, the HOA. But on the other side, the aesthetics of justice were different, and she didn't use a meeting stamp. With the dossier assembled, I filed a direct petition with the federal judge on duty, asking for the confidentiality of the association's group messages to be broken, as well as authorization to access the images from the street security cameras and forensics on the cell phones of 3 residents, those closest to the woman's leadership and possible participants in the pyrotechnic aesthetic operation, as the case became known among colleagues in the prosecutor's office. The warrant was issued in 2 days. Agents from the public prosecutor's office went to the condominium. They knocked on doors and handed out notices. And contrary to what she expected, the neighbors didn't protect her. No one there was complicit. At most, they tolerated it. But the truth was that most of them lived under the shadow of that woman's decorated authoritarianism. The first to speak was the resident of House 13. She said that, days before the fire, she heard a conversation on the speakerphone coming from the balcony of the woman's house. Words like, "I told you that car would get in the way," and "nobody will miss it if it's gone," were clearly heard. He also said that he saw 2 unknown men leaving her house around midnight on the night of the fire. One of them was holding a gallon. She didn't care at the time. She only understood later. Then it was the janitor's turn. Without being pressed, he handed over a series of images from the camera system in the central block of the condominium. They showed strange movements. A car that didn't belong to a resident parked in a hurry, 2 people walking near my garage, and a figure in the background who, despite the distance, had the same haircut and body posture as the woman. That way of pointing, as if giving orders even to the shadow. And then came the cherry on top. One of the residents, who was an administrator of the HOA group on the messaging app, decided to collaborate. He provided a complete backup of the chat, including the deleted messages. And there, among the motivational phrases, photos of standardized pots and complaints about poorly cut grass, were the prints that would seal her fate. 3 days before the fire, she wrote, "It is unacceptable for a non-member of the HOA to occupy our neighborhood without respecting our rules. Sometimes nature needs more intense pruning." 2 days earlier, another post. "Someone needs to fix that car before it becomes a rat's nest. If justice doesn't come, aesthetics will." And on the day of the fire, half an hour before the blaze, "Today, the street sleeps prettier." That was no longer just authoritarian speech. It was evidence of premeditation. With all the evidence in hand, I asked for her to be remanded in custody for incitement to crime, gang formation, and destruction of property, with the aggravating factor of attempting to intimidate a public official in the exercise of their duties. Yes, because by then, the public prosecutor's office had already made it official that, as a federal prosecutor, the attack could be interpreted as an attempt at indirect coercion. The police arrived at her house at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. She was wearing a bathrobe, with the smell of expensive perfume still in the air, and a cup of tea on the table. When she heard the word warrant, she tried to laugh it off. When she saw the papers with the federal stamp, she paled. And when she read the name of the prosecutor responsible, she froze. She wanted to teach him a lesson. She wanted to show who was in charge of the neighborhood. She just forgot that the neighborhood is still part of a country, and that country has laws, it has justice, and it has prosecutors who, even in silence, observe, they take note, and when they react, they don't send a message. The woman was used to control over the gardens, over the association's emails, over who could or couldn't hang a flag on the balcony. She truly believed that all she had to do was strike the right tone of indignation, and the city would once again call her an exemplary community leader. So, after the arrest, which, by some miracle of the ego, she called unjust detention for investigation, she decided that her version needed to be circulated. To do so, she called a local journalist, who would do anything for a hot story and half a dozen likes. The next day, there she was, sitting in a beige armchair in her carefully decorated living room, with a lamp on next to her, even though it was 10 in the morning, and looking like she'd just come from a motivational coaching session. The interview was broadcast live on an online citizen news channel. The title in the corner of the screen, "Influential Resident Accuses Harassment After Incident with Neighbor." In the conversation, she tried hard to appear victimized. She said that she always looked after the harmony of the neighborhood, that she fought for standards that benefit everyone, and that the neighbor in question was averse to living together. She called the HOA an instrument of peace and order, and even insinuated that she was being accused of being a woman in a leadership position. But the problem with arrogant people with a microphone is that they talk too much. In the middle of the interview, trying to appear strong, she let something slip that she shouldn't have. If a person insists on living outside the rules of the community, they have to bear the natural consequences. The journalist, who thought he was doing a scoop, didn't even realize the length of the sentence he had captured. But the prosecutors watched, and that snippet turned to gold. The recording was immediately attached to the case. Her defense, which until then had tried to claim innocence, now had to explain why natural consequences included a car being set on fire and messages in the HOA group practically celebrating the fact. The lawyer she hired, a local celebrity known for defending influencers in cheating scandals, could barely hold a line. He tried to claim that the phrase was taken out of context, that she was only referring to social consequences, such as isolation due to lack of collaboration. But you only had to read her comments in the days before the fire, the prints, the videos, the reports, to understand that there was no context left. Meanwhile, public opinion was beginning to turn. The mainstream press picked up the story. There were articles with headlines like "Beauty Syndicate Orders Car to be Burned and Accuses Judicial Persecution." Aesthetic justice? Woman who led HOA now leads criminal case. Federal prosecutor victim of arson. Case becomes example of abuse of community power. The trial began to take shape not only in the courts, but on social media. Instagram profiles made fun of it. They created stickers with the phrase "No HOA, no car." Videos of the woman speaking at previous meetings were retrieved. In one of them, she said, "It is necessary to impose limits on those who do not cooperate. Sometimes being firm is an act of love for order." This recording was inserted as evidence of a pattern of authoritarian behavior, but the worst was yet to come for her. The public prosecutor's office received a new complaint from a former HOA member. The man, a former treasurer, claimed that the HOA maintained an undeclared aesthetic fund, a kind of box fed by informal donations from influential residents, supposedly used for emergency actions against visual violations. And that part of this money was used to solve the case of the black car in the prosecutor's garage. Now it was no longer just arson. It was possible association for illicit purposes, money laundering, formation of a civil gang, and veiled threats against authorities. The prosecutor's office opened a new investigation. Her defense went berserk. Her lawyer wanted to resign. She cried live on the same channel as before, saying she was being victimized by a system that hates strong women, but no one else was buying it. At the preliminary hearing, she appeared in formal clothes, heavy makeup trying to hide the dark circles under her eyes from her defeat. When she heard the judge say that the case would proceed on the basis of sufficient evidence of materiality and clear indications of authorship, she almost fell off her chair. As he left the courtroom, a group of neighbors waited on the sidewalk. No protests, no offense, just looks, cold, director. The look of someone who was tired of pretending that the HOA's authoritarianism was organization, when it was always just ego disguised as regulation. That night, the whole condominium knew. The fire she lit didn't just burn my car, it burned her image, her prestige, and her reign. The day of the trial arrived with a cloudy sky, and it wasn't a metaphor. The atmosphere was charged as if the universe had understood that what was going to happen there was not just any old trial. It was the public breaking of a pattern that for years had controlled neighbors through fear of disorder, when, in fact, the greatest disorder was vanity disguised as rule. She arrived in a white blazer, her hair tied up, her makeup as forced as the smile she tried to maintain in front of the cameras. Despite everything, she still thought she could come out on top. After all, those who dictate so many rules in weekly meetings believe they can set the tone even in their own condemnation. Her defense changed its strategy at the last minute. Realizing that there was no way to challenge the evidence, they appealed for a settlement. During the break in the hearing, one of the lawyers approached me. She was willing to offer a symbolic payment of $20,000 as a way of closing the case, with a public retraction and voluntary dismissal from the HOA. He said this as if he were offering a gift. The response was short. The proposal was analyzed and rejected. Back in the courtroom, the judge asked for silence. The prosecutor in charge presented the full report. She listed the messages, the recordings, the videos, the testimonies. She read out every sentence of her interview, slowly. She recalled the gallons of water found in the house, the movements of the two men, now identified as acquaintances of the family, both of whom had previous convictions for vandalism. This time, the woman didn't speak. She kept her jaw tense, her hand clenching the hem of her jacket, her eyes fixed on a random spot on the carpet. The same look of someone who knew the castle had fallen, but was still trying to pretend she had control over the rubble. The judge took a deep breath before reading the sentence. In view of the elements presented, the documentary, audiovisual, and testimonial evidence, this court finds the defendant guilty of incitement to crime, destruction of private property, with the aggravating factor of premeditation, and attempted indirect intimidation against public authority. It is hereby ordered that the defendant be sentenced to 2 years and 8 months in semi-open regime, in addition to the payment of compensation in the amount of $180,000 to the plaintiff, including material and moral damages and court costs. The room fell silent. It wasn't the silence of shock. It was a silence of relief, like the end of a soap opera that everyone already knew the ending to, but needed to hear out loud to believe that, yes, justice also comes to neighborhoods surrounded by white picket fences and fake smiles. She left accompanied by 2 officers. No drama, no speech. For once, no words. Days later, the HOA was dissolved. The residents, tired of serving as an audience and a shield for authoritarian delusions, voted to abolish the association at an extraordinary meeting. They tore down the signs and tore up the bylaws. No one wanted to hear about compulsory gardening committees or fines for too vibrant colors. Her house was put up for sale, but the property was marked. No realtor could show it without the visitor asking, "Is this where the woman with the burnt-out car lived?" The property remained on the market for months. The price dropped, and when it was sold, it went for less than half the market value. The new resident transformed the facade. He removed the railings, ripped out the surveillance cameras, and planted a sunflower in the center of the lawn. Sunflower, the flower she hated. She said it didn't fit in with the European style of the neighborhood. The irony is in the details. Me? I continued to live there. I put a new car in the garage, not because I had to, but because of the symbolism. and I left it clearly visible, without a cover, without shame. A new, shiny, powerful model, and with a license plate that she couldn't miss when she returned to the neighborhood to pick up some documents from the real estate agent. Just Fed 01, simple, straightforward, elegant, like the sentence. That day, we crossed paths from afar. She lowered her eyes, for the first time, without sunglasses, for the first time, looking human. Karma didn't arrive in high heels. She arrived in uniform, with a warrant and a blue pen, and it showed that, in the end, those who try to control everything by appearance end up being dismantled by the truth. The HOA is over, but her story became unwritten law among the residents. And if you liked this video, don't forget to comment and leave a like.